Hey guys, this is Joseph from Jouleconcepts. Happy New Year once more. We're still in January. Um, I hope everything is fine. Today we are going to be looking at spline dynamics. Everything to it. I just feel we should, in this new year, I want to be talking more about dynamics and animation and all that. So let's see what we can look about this spline dynamics. Okay, I'm going to go over to Cinema 4D. All right, here in Cinema 4D, for you to have your spline dynamics work, what you need to know is that you need to have spline objects in the scene for spline dynamics to work. All right, so I'm going to create a spline, and that I'm going to do that in my front view. So if I go to my F4, it takes me to my front view. I'm going to create a spline somewhere here. So I'm just going to click here, hold down, and click here. Then escape. So if I go back to my perspective view, this is what I have created. So what I want to do is I'm going to move this spline up so that we can see the next thing to it. So this is the spline object that we have is on is in the air. So for us to look at spline dynamic, then it's just more like a tag. So you select the spline object, you right click in the scene, you go to your new tag. So you go to hair tags, you're going to see um, spline dynamics. So if I click on this spline dynamics, that will be added to this object. So if I hit play on my keyboard now, the object falls down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a floor object, just a plain object to interact with this. So if I play this, you notice that this falls and goes past that floor object. And the reason why this is happening is because this object is not tied to the floor object. We have to add another tag to this floor object to interact with this spline object. So for us to do that, we select this plain object, which is meant to be a floor. So we right click here, we go to new tags, we go to hair object. We're going to see hair collider. So that is what we need. I've tried several times to add collider objects in the simulation tag, but didn't work. So I don't know if you think you have a better way, and if that can work, just put it in the description for everyone to learn. But the one I know is you go to this and you go to air tag, you go to air collider. So if I undo this and play this now, so let me just add this material so you see this. So if I play this now and it falls, you notice it collides with this floor object. So that is the first thing we need to know. That's the first thing to this. So the next thing is, if I play this, you notice what happens. You notice that the bounce on this is much. So what you can do now is that if you go to the spline dynamics tag, sorry, if you go to the plane tag, the hair collider, you notice that it has bounce. So if we reduce this bounce to 0 and we play this again, you notice you have no bounce. You notice that there is no bounce, it just falls. So it depends on what you're trying to simulate. If you're trying to simulate more like a strand of hair or a cloth strand of thread of, I hope you understand, thread, and you don't want to have bounce to it, you can also add friction. If you want to have more bounce, you can bring this up, and if you play this, you notice it bounces up and more and that. So let me increase this to 300. So that is what that, so you can't really have this bounce option in the spline tag, spline dynamics tag. You only have that in the collider. So you notice this bounces up and more. So the lower the value, the less the bounce effect you're going to have. So I'm going to bring this back to, let's say, 10. So I just have a little bit of bounce. So that's fine. Then you also have friction. Now friction is more on the object. So if we have this object inclined, in this case now, sorry, if I have this inclined, and just to illustrate that this floor is not straight. So normally what will happen is that if you click this, it starts to scroll down. Notice that it starts to flow down that plane depending on the angle of inclination of the plane. All right, so if we play this back, you notice what happens before we start moving, and that's that. And you can also simulate things with that, with this friction. If we make this friction 0 and we play, you notice it slides down very fast. That is what the friction does. So if you want an effect whereby it doesn't slide, all you need to do is just increase this friction. So if we increase this friction to this, and you notice it falls and just sticks to that. So the rate at which it slides is very small. And the reason why you're having this is because the friction between this object and the floor is very high. So you won't have that sliding. So you also want to, depending on whatever you want, that is there to for you to set. So you have so I think I'm just going to be talking about these two tags here for now. So you can also decide to deactivate your collider tag. So if you deactivate that, that means there is no interaction anymore, so it falls down. So that's what this does. Then this force is used when you have force in the scene. I want to add force to this. That's when you can activate this and add force. We've not added force here, so we're going to talk about this later. So let's go to the spline dynamics. So look at the spline dynamics. You have 6 tabs here. There was a basic one is just more like the name of it. Then you have the tag and tag category, where you can also activate the collision with this object. So if you don't have collision on and you notice it doesn't collide, so for you to have this object interact with this on both tags, you must have collision activated. You must have it activated here and also activated here. If you have it deactivated and activated, it will work, and other way around. So I hope you understand that. Then the rigid body, we are going to talk about this later. So if you go to the properties, you have your drag. So if you play this, drag is just more like the rate at which this falls. So if we bring this drag to, let's say, 10, let's just make it very intense. So we make it 50% and play. You notice the rate at which it falls is slow. So the simulation is still working, dynamics is working on it, but we have put into consideration drag, so it's dragging. So if we say we don't want to have any drag, then the rate at which it goes 100%, the simulation goes at 100%. So that can also do this. So you can right click this and set. Then the stiffness, I'm going to talk about the stiffness later. Stiffness just talks about how thick or the spline object is going to be. By the time I get there, then you also have the force, where you can add force. So right now the dynamic, the gravity is -9 points. So this is the normal gravity, so that's why it falls. Okay, so if you don't want to have any fall, you want to simulate something that is in air, that means you want to make this 0. So if you make this 0 and you play, it is static. Then you can now incorporate this with your property. You have your rest hold, you can incorporate that with that. So you add a little bit of animation to that. So but then if you want to have a floating object floating up, so you can just make this a positive value. So if we make this +5 and play, it floats up. So that is what that does. So this cache is used to cache your simulation so that you can scroll your timeline in real time and have that effect. All right, so let's look at Let's get back here and look at some things here. You notice we have under the display icon, you have the mass. So you can set the mass of this object. So the mass is more like how heavy the object is. So the default value is 1. So if I want to simulate something very heavy, then that means I'm going to having a larger value of the mass. Then this fixed point is used with the point in the spline that is used to fix a particular section of this object. So if I go to this spline and I go to point mode, I click on this point, then go back to the tag and set this fix. Under this fixed, and I click on set, notice what happens, that it's going to turn purple. You can see the purple color. So that is to tell you that this point is fixed. So if we try to simulate this now, this will be fixed here while this falls and that. So if we play, notice what you have. Yes, so you can see what we're having, that even though we're having this, so let me bring this down. Okay, you don't have to. So let's just move it up more. You notice what we have. This place is fixed 1. And the other thing we can notice is that the interpolation between this, we are noticing that this is just more like a line, more like a stick. So, but if you want to simulate more like hair or cloth strand of thread, you notice you are not going to have this linear interpolation. So how can we solve that? The first thing you're going to do is to go to the spline tab, change this from Bezier to B-spline. Then if you play this again, nothing will happen. It's still the same thing you're going to have. But the reason why you're having this same thing is because you only have 2 points for the software to calculate with. You only have these points 1 and point 2. So for us to simulate that effect, we need to add more points to this. So for us to add more points to this, just go to the point mode, Control 8, select all, then right click. You're going to see subdivide. Click on the settings under subdivide. Then you can set the number of subdivision you want. So the lesser the value, the less accurate the curve you're going to have for that. So depending on your machine, you should know the value to go for. 20 might be too much for you. But in my case, I want to have a more. So notice, I think 20 is still even small. So I'm going to undo that. Right click and do this. So maybe I'm going to change this to 100. Just want to have lots more points. So this is fine. So now we have a lot of points here. So as soon as we do that, what will happen is that if we replay this, everything will fall down. And the reason is because adding more points have reset this. So for us to pin this, we have to go back and pin and select the point that we want to pin and click on the set again for us to do that. So you need to put that into consideration. So if we play this now, you notice that this falls and you start to have this air-like effects. So that is how you can solve that issue where you have this. So I'm going to undo this. So I'm going to stop and play, and what I want to do now is to select 2 points. So 1 point here and another point here. So select this point and shift this point. Then come here, release first or clear, then set points. So now I have 2 points set. If I play this falls and have this effect. Okay. Okay. So let's see here. Okay, so we have close spline. We don't want to close the spline. So if we play this, we have this effect. So let's now look at this effect and go back into what these settings do. All right, so let's look at some of these. Now the drag, you already know the drag, so let's look at this radius. So bring this radius to 0 and replay. You notice the rate at which this comes down and up is more. So if we bring this to, like, let's say 1000 or 100 and replay that, nothing really changes here. But then, okay, let me reset this. So if you come to the stiffness and bring the stiffness to 0 and play, you notice that this object bounces and it's not really that stiff. Okay, it's not really that stiff. If we bring this up to 100% and undo, just play this back, you notice the effect you get to have is that this becomes a lot stiffer than this. So if I bring another object more like a sphere and add this collider to this, so let me increase this to more like 500. Then I bring this and start moving this towards this. Okay, sorry. You will see the effect you get here. Moving towards this object, you're having this effect. But if you reduce this stiffness to somewhat 0, you notice the rate at which it deflects is more compared to if this is 100. You notice what happens. So that's what the stiffness does. The rate at which it falls down, the gravity effect affects it is more when the stiffness is lesser than when the stiffness is high. So if I bring the stiffness to 0, gravity affects it more. All right, so I'm going to bring this back to the default. I have that. Then the next thing is rubber. If you bring this rubber to 0, you notice what happens. Then you don't really have the rubber effect on this. So maybe you want to do abstract designs and all that, you could use this. But if you want to have that effect more like a rubber effect, then you want to start adding rubber effect to this. So what actually activates this is changing the value from 0 to 1. So if you bring to 0, you have that. If you bring this thing to 0.1, you still have this jaggedness to it, so it's not really smooth. So but as soon as you bring this to 1, it starts becoming smooth and smooth. Then increasing this value makes it a lot smoother. So that is what the rubber does. So let's bring this back to this. So the rest hold, if we bring the rest hold to 100, everything is just straight. So that's what the rest hold does. Everything is straight. It's as its rest from the word rest hold. It holds this object to its rest. So nothing, same as if nothing happens. All right. But if you bring this rest hold to more like 50% and replay, you notice a kind of shifting here. If you would see, can you see that? Kind of shifting here. So it's trying to, but this value is still too much. So if you bring this rest hold to 10 and play, you have that. Still having that effect. So what the rest hold does is more like bring this object to its initial state before you added that tag. So that is what the rest hold does. So if we bring this to 0.5, you have this effect. It's trying to bring it to its initial state. Then this rest mix does similar things with the rest hold. So if we bring this to 50% and replay, you notice it start coming down a little bit and a little bit and that. So that's what these two, what they do. All right, so for the forces to work, you have to go to your simulate menu, you go to your particle, then you have these forces. These are the forces that will work with it. So if I want to add more like turbulence to this, I can add turbulence into the scene. So for the turbulence to have effect, I have to go to the spline. You can see where you have the mode force include. I have to drag this turbulence to this. Then you start seeing the effect of this turbulence. The turbulence is having effect, but you don't really see more because we have to go back to the turbulence and increase the strength. So this strength is small. So if we bring this to 10, you notice that the turbulence is having effect and also the scale. So you can already see what that. So if we bring this to more like a realistic value of let's say 1.5 meters and reduce the scale, you can see. So this can be used to um, illustrate more like a windy effect, and also the frequency. You can also work with the frequency. The frequency is more like the speed of the turbulence. So you can just reduce the frequency to whatever value you want. So you can see the speed is not much compared to when you bring it here. So you can see the speed is reduced, and so you can do work with a lot of this. So if you want to add rotation to it and wind and all that, you can also add them to this. All you just need to do is make sure you add them into this effect. So the rotation, you can increase the angular rotation. Maybe we want this to be 50 and maybe bring this out. And so you have this effect. Then you can change from any of this. Maybe you want acceleration, force, or aerodynamic wind. That so here you can add these forces and add it to your spline dynamics and works. Okay, so I think this is just more like a, a basic setup for spline dynamics and adding colliders to that. So if you feel this was helpful, please give me a thumbs up because it helps me. And if you are new to this channel, please subscribe because I do similar tutorials to this every time. So thank you for sticking around. You have a wonderful day and God bless you. Bye.